Hi, and welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc here, and today we explore the drawings of Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, or just known as Toulouse-Lautrec, born in 1864 and died in 1901. French artist, painter, draftsman, certainly printmaker, illustrator, and a very interesting character in the world of French art in the 19th century and Parisian art. So let's dive here and take a look at the drawings here. So you'll find that Lautrec drew very idiosyncratically, academically trained, and then loosened that style to a linear style. He drew quite a bit in color, and so that's something that you could explore in wax pencil or pastel pencil or ink pencil or drawing with a brush as well, whether it feels more like a drawing rather than a finished kind of full painting. That's something that Lautrec mastered and did quite often as he studied French Parisian life, both its more if we could call it more lurid, sort of dirtier underbelly, if you would, but also more exotic scenes of nightlife with exotic color, lurid color, and interesting affectations of drawing, with certainly strange compositional angles that kind of signified his interest in and influence from Japanese prints and also photography as well, just like Degas in some of the other impressionists and also post-impressionists. So we have a lovely, very structured but yet loose study from Lautrec here with lots of line weight variation, lighter line in the cuff here or the collar, and then some darker line to hold weight, and really the models being hit by a light source kind of coming from this direction. So we have a little stronger light source in through here, or darks in through to show that, and a little bit of cast shadow in the eye area, but the structure holds quite nicely. Here we see a horse and rider scene, two horses and riders, one perhaps kind of a polo rider, the other one a little bit more of a top hat bourgeois. Lautrec was a wealthy, certainly young man and a rider of horses, and it's the story generally goes that he was of normal development, and as a young boy, young man, was involved in a horse riding accident and was stunted from the waist downward and became somewhat shorter, certainly, and had a more diminutive status, and that is certainly something that goes along with Lautrec's status. And here we see a line drawing with probably looks like graphite, and then also in blue, perhaps a wax type of pencil. A quick kind of loosening sort of sketch to lay in a composition, both where horses, one coming towards or away from us, and then also towards us, in a kind of meeting between these two individuals. But it gives us a sign of the mind of Lautrec and also his compositional study and sketch habits. Lautrec is world famous for illustration and certainly lithography of the time, and these signify these. You've probably seen these all over, either online or in cafes, or certainly in prints in homes or around maybe your university or school. And generally these had to do with theatrical performances or dancing at the Moulin Rouge or con dancing of certain styles. And we see that here with a sort of tongue-in-cheek addition of the dancer here with the leg raised and open, and then we can certainly see the male perhaps in a state of shock or embarrassment. But what holds through is the lovely design, the flatness of color, the tilted in really angularity of the one-point perspective, the silhouetting of the drawing of the figures in the background. We see a crowded theatrical cafe-type performance, and again the lovely design of the typography and the wording there, and of course the signature kind of Lautrec drawing and line style and his signature way of rendering the figure. A simplicity here, but an overall tight design that works well for advertisement. We see a lovely here study of from LAUTREC of a ballerina dancer with this expressive kind of scratchy quality painterly line that is synonymous with LAUTREC here, working on oftentimes cardboard type material, drawing in oil. We see a layering effect where he's laying in line. Let's go in a little closer if we can, see if that resolves. It resolves pretty well. So laying in with a simple kind of line. Some of it looks like to be a wax pencil or a pastel kind of pencil. Here you can tell it's slightly scratchy. And then he'll add layers and layers of drawing in paint and brush to get a lovely kind of finished effect of a sketch and a painting. So he really hovers in between drawing and also painting, drawing with a brush. And it's the affectation of the milky, creamy Caucasian skin tones that he gets there, the mauve, the purples, the flicks of post-impressionist design here, the quicker kind of sketch, the loosening of the forms, but yet remember that the Impressionists were well studied structurally. So if we take a quick look at the head, here's the lovely kind of box coming down in a sort of cambiasso kind of tilt. And so all this holds together in scale and proportion and anatomy. They were well-trained artists, and there's no less so that we see here from LAUTREC. But it's the loosening, brushy kind of style that really echoes later on Cezanne, and then to abstract expressionism on down the art historical line. Several of Lautrec's scenes were of brothels, which he did frequent quite often, or women, lonelier women, or women with a psychological kind of edge or bent to them, not necessarily fresh or happy, but perhaps tired and fatigued and overworked, and maybe in conditions that made them certainly depressed or more miserable. And we see that kind of psychological bent in the expression of the drawing here by Lautrec, and the same kinds of materials that I just talked about in the prior ballerina, but a loosening of the lay-in, very quick, very sketchy, and he continues that gestural quality in the flicks of transparent almost color, and then he comes back over with more opaque kind of whites at the end, the yellows, the greens that are classic Lautrec, that he probably observed and heightened and pushed the saturation from artificial lighting, gas lighting, certainly night lighting, and the new invention of electricity that came along, and this lovely kind of signature choppy kind of style, along with a gestural quality and a flow, and the same kind of color that, again, that we see from Lautrec, and then the use of negative space around this sort of cardboard material that Lautrec used. You can use cardboard and oil. You can use an oil, or you could even use acrylic. Would be easier nowadays, or gouache, or even watercolor, right on a kind of cardstock paper, or a harder or heavier cardboard. If you do use oil, it will seep and sink into the paper somewhat and eat away at that particular paper. Oftentimes, what the Impressionists did was to lay their palettes out on a kind of paper beforehand, lay out the color on the palette, let it dry somewhat, let some of the oil sink into the paper, and then use it. It was a little bit drier and can be used as a fresher kind of drawing process. And here we see almost a Van Gogh-like rendering of the choppiness of the flicks of the brushstroke. Let's go in a little bit deeper of a young lady on a horse here. And we notice the loosening now of also even structure. We see the awkward sort of head scaling of the horse figure here, but the lower half seems to hold pretty well in terms of its scale and structure. So there was a loosening technique. There was this idea of the very quick pose. Notice the real slanted and skewed but accurate one-point kind of perspective as the path goes back deeper, which again was influenced by not only, again, Japanese prints but also photography. The impression of the landscape around the model and the really vibrant contrast between the more silhouetted loosely rendered figure, relatively flatly with downward strokes and hints of greens against the blues and some strong outlines that changes color. So drawing with color, flattening somewhat, also cross-contouring to still get 3 dimensions. So we're in a world that's in transition between flat and also round and also loosening and also vibrant affectations of imaginative color that is less observed and more pushed towards the artist's skill and taste. And he became a force not only in his contemporary time, but certainly as he is remembered in art history. And here, a portrait of a woman could be Jane Avril, an actor of that time, stage actor, and also, I believe, singer that he used in portraiture more than certainly one time. And here we see classic Lautrec, so we can get a little bit closer to the wispiness, the gestural quality of the lay-in. So we can assume that the lay-in down here was left certainly more gestural because the focus is back on the head, but we can assume that this kind of lay-in style with the brush on the cardboard stock here, right, was done through the head. And then notice how Lautrec comes back and then renders kind of a full Lautrecian, if you will, color palette of these mauve, aqua greens, fluorescent type colors with strong saturated cobalt, almost violet blues, blacks, right? A flattening kind of color. Notice how it's relatively flat, and then he'll render a little bit around the eyes, a little bit of the nose. So we don't have a half and half kind of lighting like we would, right, during the Renaissance or Baroque or even Romanticism, but we have now a more direct kind of lining, cafe lining, or observable kind of lining with a little bit more flatness. But then this whole part of the composition is rendered to a focal point in a relatively sketchy finish, again with the background left open and more silhouetted. And this on its own, we see contemporary artists, abstract expressionists, use this kind of mark making system on its own. So this really foreshadows, if you will, that's the right word I was trying to use, abstract expressionism, or the mark making and the idea of art or a painting for its own sake rather than some kind of narrative that we see in Lautrec's work. We find it rather 45 years later in large canvases that are rendered by de Kooning and Motherwell and Klein and other abstract expressionists as well. And lastly, another drawing here, probably on a tone type of charcoal paper that looks to be kind of modeled and molded over time and aged, and probably women, working women, prostitutes in a brothel, in various states of slight undress or seduction with the buttock exposed in terms of seduction. But again, we see Lautrec at his best with drawing with color, drawing in a looser kind of style, a suggestive kind of gesture, or again, we can call it impressionistic kind of style with the very pale Caucasian sort of style, stereotypical kind of French skin. The stockings here suggested, very probably quick sketch and study done from observation. Again, he frequented brothels quite often. I don't believe he ever had a partner or married, but he had multiple arrangements, certainly, and we see this drawing signifying his habits and his nightlife. And again, a very original mind in terms of composition and drawing in observing Parisian nightlife. Nobody was working in this particular manner, and yet here we have Lautrec, who helped really, I think, also usher in Gauguin and certainly Van Gogh in post-impressionism's full run into the next progressive stages of art and design.